John, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk here in your home city, not for the first time, but this time on camera. You now have a tremendous standing in terms of your commentary on public life and politics, the relationship between culture and the way in which the public square plays out, and also what's happening in our universities. But before we begin to talk about those things, can you just tell us a little bit about your own personal and professional journey and your understanding of the relationships between a functioning society and the institutions it creates?
Well, certainly, John. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you about these things. I think, as will come out in our conversation, there are a lot of processes and trends that are affecting democracies and the possibilities of public life in a lot of the Western democracies, and then in the English-speaking countries in particular. We have a lot in common nowadays. In fact, I'm kind of used to traveling around. Throughout my life, I've loved to travel, and usually I have to kind of apologize for my country, or apologize. People have all kinds of accusations, and why are things so insane in your country? And now it's a lot more fun traveling around because we're all in it together, and things are going haywire everywhere. It seems everywhere, meaning in the Western democracies. So my own journey to this point is I guess a bit of an odd one, which is that I started off as a very, very stereotypical, sort of American left-leaning. I'm Jewish from the suburbs of New York City. I went to Yale, an Ivy League school. I ran a gun control group. I always voted Democratic, as I still do. But I was very much on one team. And as the polarization in our country was heating up in the 1990s, the left and the right in this country, of course, have never been fond of each other, but the research on how they feel about each other shows that they really began to get more hostile in the 90s, and then after 2000, that split accelerated. So as I was doing research in graduate school, and then as an assistant professor on how morality varies across cultures, I worked in India and Brazil, I began seeing that left and right in America were becoming increasingly like different cultures with a different religion, different U.S. Constitution, different laws of environmental science. I mean, we're really becoming almost two separate worlds. And so I began, after John Kerry lost to George W. Bush in 2004, I thought George W. Bush was a terrible candidate, terrible president, and I thought the Democrats should have won both elections. And so in 2004, I decided to change my research over from looking at how cultures vary to looking at how left and right vary. And my explicit goal, I shouldn't say explicit, my personal reason for doing that was because I just couldn't stand it, the way the Democrats talked about morality. They had no clue what it was about. They seemed to think that politics is about promising people a bill that will give them more money, that our bill's better for you. And no, politics at the national level is more like religion. You have to have sacred values that you're calling people to, you're creating a community. So I started studying politics as a form of religion or culture, and that led me to write The Righteous Mind, my book that came out in 2012. And as I was writing that, while I started off hoping to help the Democrats, I committed myself to really understanding conservatives from the inside. I wasn't just going to write platitudes. I really wanted to read conservative materials. I treated it almost like an anthropological assignment, let me understand what they think they're up to. I subscribed to National Review. I watched conservative television. And what I discovered was the basic insight of John Stuart Mill, which is that you can't really know your own side of an argument until you know the other side. And all of us are so incomplete and so blinded by our team loyalties that we can't understand the truth unless we engage with people who challenge it. And so by the end of the book, I didn't become a conservative, but I basically stepped off the team. I just said, there's to understand what's going on, it blinds you if you're on a team. There are good ideas all over. And so I just became a sort of a nonpartisan moderate.
John Stuart Mill's quote to that effect is actually very strong, isn't it? He more or less says, if you haven't understood the other perspective, no matter how passionately you hold your own,
that's right,
it's actually pretty useless.
He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good and no one may have been able to disprove them. Here I'm beginning to paraphrase. But if he does not know what the other side's reasons are, then he can have no confidence that he has gotten it right himself. And he even says, it's not enough that those ideas should be brought to you by your teacher who does not believe them himself. You must hear them from people who honestly hold them, who believe in those ideas. And so this is one of the problems that we're having, as at least in America, as all of our institutions purify, and the universities they lean left. There are very good reasons for that. That's always going to be the case. But as they've gone ever more left, and there aren't really conservatives available to act as teachers, students are not able to get a full understanding of politics, and this damages our civic life. It prepares the students poorly to go into government service.
I'd love to come back to the two broad issues there and perhaps to treat them one after the other, sort of the political scene and the way we debate, and then secondly, what's happening to prepare the next generation, because you're face-to-face in the universities. Before we do, it seems to me, given your background and as I watch the extraordinary fascination globally with what Jordan Peterson's saying, he's a clinical psychologist of course, that psychology's become the new font, if you like, the new driving force for establishing morality and the way we interact with the world. It's supplanting philosophy and theology to some extent.
Well, I'm not sure I'd agree that we're now the guide to morality. That's something I've argued with Sam Harris about as to whether psychology can tell you what is right. But in terms of who are the people, what are the fields that we're looking to for guidance, I do agree that the humanities, which is supposed to be or traditionally was the field of reflection on the human condition and what it is to be human and human relationships, and there's a good reason that we all read Shakespeare in our high school educations. The humanities, I agree, have withdrawn and become less relevant, and at the same time, psychology has become more relevant. And I think that on the humanities side, there are a variety of humanities, and in philosophy, there's still some very good work being written that is accessible and important. But I think literary studies has retreated into a more sort of ideological, identity-focused. If you look on the web pages of many people in literature or language media studies, it does tend to be identity-focused work is the most common area. So I think that becomes less relevant to people who don't have those specific identity concerns. At the same time, psychology went through this wonderful renaissance with positive psychology, where Marty Seligman in 1999, when he was president of the American Psychological Association, said, you know what, in psychology if there's something wrong with you, we got it covered. But if you're not having trouble in life, if you just want to know how to live a happier, better life, we actually don't have much to say. And so I've been involved with positive psychology from the very beginning. And so I think psychology has sort of made itself much more relevant to everyday life and to people, as Seligman put it, we can take you from -8 to 0, but we didn't have much to take you from 0 to +8, and now we do. And so I do think that many more people are turning to psychology. The other line that's been great is evolutionary psychology. We have people like Steven Pinker, who are some of the best writers in the world, taking an evolutionary perspective on human nature. It can't tell you what you ought to do, but boy, is it helpful for figuring out why things go wrong or why we can't have this or that particular utopia. So yeah, I'd agree with the premise of your question.
You've talked about the impoverishment of the public debate and dialogue and the moral sort of content of it. Are we in danger of reducing it to simple questions of do no harm and know your rights?
Let's see. So there's been a lot written on moral vocabulary and its impoverishment. I like to think about encompassing systems. And so if you're within a particular religious community and you have all these books you can refer to and you have a specialized moral vocabulary, and especially if you have stories, we think in stories, we think in narratives. So when everybody shares a sort of a common history and common religion, you can have very ornate, rich, powerful moral concepts, as Christian denominations do, as Orthodox Jews do. But when you have a lot more diversity and secularism, there's not as much in common, and moral terms get reduced down to the minimum set you need, which is, okay, I'm not going to judge you in your private life, you don't judge me, but I won't hurt you, you don't hurt me. If we make contracts, you honor your contracts, I'll honor mine. So you do, in commercial hubs, you do tend to get morality reducing down to the minimum necessary for different people to live together. And that's great. That opens up possibilities for diversity. Amsterdam in the 17th century, or New York or London, these are the great commercial, and then they become intellectual hubs too. So there can be something good about this thin morality. But if the whole country has this thin morality and not a sense of what holds it together, and it has diversity, then it can become unbalanced, where the forces sort of pulling you apart are not countered by the forces pulling you together. So I do think that as our nations become diverse, secular, liberal democracies, which is a kind of country that I'm very fond of, I think that's good, but as they become ever more that way, we need to do more work to think about the forces pulling us in, to have a kind of a common canopy, some common set of understandings about who we are and what we're doing, within which we can disagree peacefully and constructively.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a lot of power in some of the narratives that were once central to our civilization. Love your neighbour, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The story of the Good Samaritan. As you say, I think it looks a bit thin sometimes now. We wonder what we can go back to, where we might draw a moral compass from. And in Australia, we've got a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the banks and other financial institutions. And what it's revealing, I think, is that trust has broken down very badly, because a lot of people in very powerful positions have behaved in a way that is not acceptable. There were codes once sort of quite deeply embedded, I think, in our culture, which are now often forgotten, at least, sometimes decried, actually demonised, in the name of scrubbing out our past.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing in many, many countries is a decline of trust in each other, but especially in government. And so it varies. I think in the Scandinavian countries it hasn't dropped as much, but the drop in trust is big in the United States and in many, perhaps most countries nowadays. And I think there's at least two reasons for this. One is the rise of the internet and social media means that whatever was happening before, much was hidden, we didn't know about it. So it may be that we're not getting any, or it may be that our governments are no less dysfunctional, no less corrupt, or more corrupt, I should say. But it's just that now we all know about it. And it's not just that we know about it, we know about things that aren't even true, or maybe we're more likely to hear such things. So I think one of the reasons that so many democracies are having trouble at the same time is because of the very rapid recent rise of social media and the discovery of how various moral and political entrepreneurs can use it to hurt whichever side they want to hurt. That's part of it. But I do think there's also a change in leadership and moral leadership. What I mean is that there were older WASP ideas. So as I said, I'm Jewish. My grandparents came to America around 1905 from Russia and Poland, and Americans of their generation, especially my parents growing up in the 1940s and 50s, wanted to assimilate to the WASP ideal. And while my parents couldn't join the WASP Country Club in Scarsdale, there were obstacles like that, but they weren't big obstacles. As my father puts it, the economy was booming, it was wide open. If you had the goods, if you had the ideas, if you had the work, you'd be successful. So there was a kind of a WASP culture that whatever its faults, they did have ideals of leadership that have been gradually replaced. I think David Brooks and some other people have really commented on what happens when leadership, or I should say, achievement of high status it shifts over to doing really, really well on tests. And so in America and many other countries, we have an aristocracy based on test performance that got you into the top schools and then the top graduate schools or law programs. And when honor or honors means I did best on the test as opposed to a sense of honor, it may be, I don't know what data we could find on this, but it may be that many of our leaders just don't have the same notions of honor that they used to.
Do you think perhaps there's a sense in which the idea of truth has changed, watered down, perhaps even been abandoned? That you talk about ideals, you talk about honour, you talk about the things that in many ways our culture would once have seen as being integral to the character that's necessary to leadership. Perhaps it's been washed out of the system, and so what you've now got is a sort of moral relativism that says, I feel this way or that way, therefore it must be, therefore it is.
Well, there's
but it's very, very subjective. It's very lacking in broad appeal.
I think there are a few different things going on there in the phenomena that you're talking about. Nobody's really a relativist. Nobody acts as though there's no truth and
no one.
So nobody's really a relativist. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think there is, as part of growing diversity and sensitivity, which is a good thing, there's a hesitancy or reluctance to criticize others. And so that could end up being a good thing. If everybody is from the same culture, at the extremes you can get a kind of a desire for, be it Sharia in the Muslim tradition, or Orthodox Jews, or conservative Christian groups. You do have communities that are so homogeneous, they want a kind of a moral law to regulate everything. And so diversity breaks that up. That could be a good thing. But what we end up with is the risk of the Tower of Babel. That is, that when there is no overarching canopy, there is no set of shared narratives, we lose a moral vocabulary that can sort of bind us and constrain us. And then people have the sense of what Emile Durkheim called anomie. So the great sociologist Emile Durkheim wrote a lot about anomie, normlessness. It's the state of affairs when there is no clear set of rules for how to behave. Some people might think, oh, well, this is freedom. I mean, a religious community would be so binding and constraining. I want none of those rules. I want freedom. But anomie breeds suicide and a feeling of meaninglessness and hopelessness. So I think that might be what you're pointing to, that I think people have a sense of anomie. Suicide rates are going up in America for young people.
And in Australia, yeah.
Okay. And drug addiction, I don't know if you're having this
anxiety.
Opioid. That's right. Yeah. Anxiety, depression, suicide, self-harm are going up rapidly for young people. We don't know exactly why this is. Social media is a part of it. We don't fully understand it. It really is just since 2011 or 2012, strangely, that these rates are going up so fast. So something is happening where the sort of the basic meaning superstructure or architecture is, you could say crumbling or you could say changing. I don't know, but it can be unnerving to many people.
Yeah, part of the reason that I'm keen to talk to people like you is to try and get a better handle on how we have got to where we've got to and where we might go. Because of that problem, I'm a father, you're a father, I've just become a grandfather.
Congratulations.
Young Australians, the research is really quite staggering. They don't feel that they will have the same opportunities in life that their parents and grandparents had. Yeah. And as I say, the numbers are really, the data is quite compelling. And it's really very concerning. They're worried about what we're leaving them. But to come to the two streams, to touch the first of them, sort of public life and what's happening. Here in this country you have a remarkable writer, David Brooks, and I sometimes have the opportunity to follow his opinion from the other side of the pond, which is what we tend to call the Pacific. And he wrote in the New York Times opinion piece in January this year, How Democracies Perish. And he said this: everybody agrees society is in a bad way. We might have our different takes on why it's in a bad way or how to fix it, but everyone seems to agree on that much at least. But what exactly is the main cause of the badness? Some people emphasise economic issues. The simultaneous concentration of wealth at the top and the stagnation in the middle has delegitimised the system. People like me, David Brooks writes, emphasise cultural issues. If you have 60 years of radical individualism and ruthless meritocracy, you're going to end up with a society that is atomised, distrustful and divided. It is concerning.
Yes. Yes. David Brooks is one of the most perceptive commentators we have in this country. And I think as a person who, by temperament, it's really not clear whether he's on the left or the right, but he's familiar with arguments from all sides. And he's always had his finger on the social threads, the social fabric. So I think he, as he says, he's on the side of people who put more emphasis on the social changes. I am too. Economic factors matter, but they matter overwhelmingly through how they affect our psychology and our perceptions of each other and of the legitimacy of society. What I mean is that as societies get wealthier, it's true that wealthy countries are happier than non-wealthy countries. That's a big effect. But as each country gets wealthier, it doesn't necessarily get any happier because we don't really notice absolute levels of material prosperity or anything else. We notice changes. We notice how we're doing compared to others. We notice how we're doing compared to ourselves in the past. And so the post-war era, the late 20th century, was a boom time for our Western democracies, economically for the most part. And there was a sense of expansion, a sense of hope. And just as you can kind of get like a compound interest thing going where, you know, hope breeds hope and the future's going to be brighter, when that turns around, it can sort of contract pretty quickly. And I think David and conservatives tend to be more aware of what is lost, of how things used to be. So I, too, am generally on the side of saying, if you look at the world, material prosperity, things are still going great for most people in the world, but something's going wrong with the Western democracies. We are losing our sense of trust, hope, optimism, trust in each other, the sense that we can solve our problems. I don't know what's happening in Australia, but at least in this country, the ability of the Congress to actually solve any problem we thought it couldn't get any worse a few years ago, and now it's worse. So we are in a time of skepticism and hopelessness, many of us, about the future of this country.
Well, now to tease that out a bit, because I agree with you, I'm sure these issues at heart are social, but perhaps in a slightly different way to the one that you've just expressed. Not to deny that, but to look at it another way. You could say that Camelot is over for the West in the sense that those booming economic times have come to an end, and in fact most Western countries now face massive problems, not just of current debt.
Right, the budgetary problems are.
Debt coming at us in unfunded liabilities.
Yes.
For most of the European countries, of course, they also face a demographic cliff. So the population, the number of taxpayers collapses at the same time as the entitlement costs go through the roof. We have enormous geopolitical and strategic issues confronting us around the world since the collapse of the Iron Curtain. We've had a sort of unipolar world order led by, America. That now looks to be giving way to a more 19th century multipolar world. We have environmental issues, really big issues confronting us. What's the point of all of this? It's surely that, as you've written extensively on the subject of how human beings have over time learnt that cooperation and pulling together is the way to get things done, build a better life, I guess resolve problems, if I'm not putting words in your mouth. We seem at once to face a mountain of serious problems that need really serious, careful, rational, reasoned thinking where data and evidence are important, but we're more factionalised, more atomised and more emotional than we've been for a very long time. There's a real problem here.
There is. When you put it that way, you compound my sense of pessimism. But whenever I go too deep into pessimism, I always hear the voice of Steve Pinker and Matt Ridley and a few other intellectuals, especially libertarians, who say, you know what? People have always thought this, intellectuals have always thought this, and then things just keep getting better. And the more serious problems get, the more people try to work on them, and solutions are found that you could not have anticipated. So while I see very little reason to be hopeful now that things will improve in the way we govern ourselves in America in the next few years, I wouldn't quite say that. I wouldn't say that the Western democracy, our run is over. And yes, we face huge problems, and I don't see us addressing them. But yet somehow, 50 years from now, we probably will have. Something is going to happen that we can't see. Now, of course, it could be something horrible. It could be a nuclear war. Who knows? But I'm just saying, for all the pessimism that I might be agreeing with you on here in our interview, I would not bet against America or the West. It's always been a losing bet in the past. Maybe the odds are closer to 50-50 now than they were in the past, but I certainly would not count us out. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'd respond by saying the very reason that I'm keen to talk to you is that I think you're pointing the way to some answers and doing something about it so we can...
Okay, all right, so you know what? Let's talk about that. What would it take to have a turnaround? So we have a variety of trends that are not looking hopeful, and there's no sign that we have the capacity in our public lives, in our government, to address these trends, at least in my country. I was just in Scandinavia a year or two ago, and it was just so amazing to see these countries in which, when they have a problem, they convene people to work on it, and they come up with a solution, and then they implement the solution. I was like, wow, why can't we have this? And we can't have that in America in the coming decade or two, I would bet. So what are we going to do? Well, we have to rethink how we address problems. I think we have to kick as much off the federal plate as possible, give it back to the states. Our state governments are not as paralyzed. We have to find ways to bring private industry in to solve more problems. Now, up until a year or two ago, I was always saying, I think like Silicon Valley could find ways for people to take care of their health needs without even having to go to a hospital. There's all kinds of things we can do without even doctors. We don't trust Silicon Valley as much now as we did a year or two ago, unfortunately. But that would be an example of ways to take problems off of the federal plate and get them solved elsewhere. Then we really have to look at what's happening to education and child rearing, because for all our problems now, the next generation, that is the kids being raised now, the kids in college now, are even less prepared to engage in the democratic process of debate and dialogue with people they disagree with. So it's sort of like, one of these things like a Harry Houdini escape, where, okay, he's got all these problems and he's locked he's handcuffed and now we're gonna light this rope on fire so he only has, a short amount of time before he can get out. But I think that we will find ways to change education. I think the mental health crisis is so severe. The rising rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide are so severe that I think they're going to cause some major rethinking. So I don't know what's going to give, but I think that we will find solutions to some of these problems.
Can I tease out then some of the things that I think you've said? One observation you made was that, and I think you said it was partly related to the fact that one side of politics, i.e. the left and the line of thinking that goes with what we call the progressive left, I think you'd call it the liberal left in this world.
I try to stay away from the word liberal,
yep,
because it has a special meaning, has all kinds of good connotations, and it's come to mean just left in America. So let's say progressive and left, not liberal.
Okay. Well, where I was seeking to get to was that you made the observation that it wasn't until you were well educated and well into your academic life and so forth, and you've talked a bit about that a moment ago, that you came to understand, because you sat down and decided you were going to understand other perspectives. Which leads me to a couple of things I'd love you to pad out a bit more. Firstly, surely, in terms of everything that you and I are saying is going to be important to finding our way forward, you'll never get good public policy out of a bad debate.
Right, that's right.
So a debate depends on a lot of things: a commitment to evidence, to reason, to respecting the other person. The old adage, which was, I think, Voltaire's biographer, wasn't it? An American woman in the 30s, summarising his views. I may disagree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it.
Right. It wasn't Voltaire himself, but yes.
It implies two things, though. Firstly, the other person has a right, have dignity, standing. They should be able to put their views and ask their questions without being personally attacked. And secondly, the issue on the table ought to be the issue on the table, not the other person, not the person who put it there. Respectful debate, evidence-based, seems to be critical of this, and you've done a lot of thinking around that. In terms of trying to understand what you call, I think, a moral palette. So the left tends to say that the right lacks compassion. The right tends to say that the left is unrealistic or naive. But you've actually found in your research something quite different and quite revealing.
So my research on moral foundations theory, which grows out of Richard Schwader's work in anthropology originally, and then it's work I did with my colleagues at yourmorals.org, What we find is that people on the left tend to prioritize issues of care and compassion. That's the number one moral foundation. And then also, everybody cares about fairness, but on the left, especially fairness as equality has a special ring, whereas on the right, equality of outcome is of no importance. Equality of opportunity is important for everybody, but proportionality tends to be more what the right means by fairness. So if you do the crime, do the time. If you do something wrong, you need to be punished, is a kind of proportionality. And then the big difference, though, is that people on the social conservatives, not libertarians, but social conservatives, also value group loyalty, respect for authority and tradition, and a sense of sanctity or purity. Again, everybody understands these personally, but the sort of the public philosophy, the governing philosophy of the left is based more and more on care and compassion for the vulnerable, and on the right is based more on sort of group cohesion, protecting the group, make America great, defend our borders, build a wall, restore tradition, those sorts of things. And that's actually great. I mean, it's good. That's like a real yin-yang sort of thing that you want to have. The left tends to drive forward the rights revolutions. I thought that we'd gotten full rights for women over the previous decades. Since the rights revolutions of the '60s, I thought things were going pretty well. But then you learn, well, actually, there was a lot more sexual harassment than we realized, and that's always pushed by the left. But at the same time, the left tends to pursue policies that, at least nowadays, that will pit groups against each other, and that I think can make it more difficult to run institutions nowadays. There are a variety of problems with the way that identity politics is pursued. You have to have identity politics, but there are different formats of it. All I'm saying is, this little portrait of the left and the right, it means that they should be together in one system. You need a yin and a yang pushing in different directions. The problem is that human beings are so good at tribalism, at us versus them, that there's a certain, let's say, parameter setting, a certain level of conflict which is ideal, and if you ramp it up too much, it becomes really destructive. For example, intramural sports competitions. If you have teams at a university and they divide up into sports teams and they play each other, they don't hate each other. A little rivalry is actually good, and it makes them love their in-group more, and it makes them not really hate the out-group more. So a little rivalry is good, it stimulates effort, it's more fun. But if you ramp it up too high, you get English soccer hooligans. You get people who actually want to smash the skulls of the other people with a pipe. And that's where we are in American politics, at least. Again, not for the majority of people, but for those who are really active. It's getting more. There hasn't been much physical violence yet, but we're moving that way.
This tribalism that you talk of, we see it in the data in Australia. You've got more people now identifying as right-wing, self-identifying, and more people identifying as left-wing.
Decline in the middle, yeah.
And the middle is declining.
Right. That's right. And
yet, your work, again, very powerfully points to the need for us all to understand our shared humanity.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the actually sources of hope that I have, is that these identity-focused movements, I think they were necessary. They're addressing real concerns, and I'm hopeful that now that some of them gotten to such degrees of excess that there's widespread revulsion at them. As Steve Bannon said, he's Trump's advisor, right-wing populist. He basically said, if the more the Democrats talk about identity, the more we win, because most people are members of an identity group, but that doesn't mean that they buy that kind of identity politics. It actually turns off. There are, a lot of black people are turned off by being treated like, you are your race, and same for members of every other identity group. So, I think that at some point, the next generation is going to look at all this stuff. And they've been raised, in this country, they're raised with such mixing. My son, so my wife is Korean American, our kids are visibly biracial. My son goes to a selective school here in New York City where most of the kids are Asian. And they tell all kinds of ethnic jokes, Asian jokes. The Asians make fun, so they're going to think that the passion, the anger of the older people around these issues is just kind of ridiculous and pointless. So I'm hopeful that at some point it will burn itself out, And either the kids now or their kids at some point will get past it and will be able to actually just work on problems rather than turning it into a quasi-religious issue of, where, we are absolutely right and you're evil and we're going to destroy you.
Yeah, before we come to the kids, I recently was talking to a fellow I count a good friend from very much a left-wing perspective. He served in our federal parliament for a long time, and he was talking about this business of identity politics and bemoaning what it had done to his own political movement. Because he said, once we were about universalism, our objective was to look after the oppressed, the weak, to ensure that all Australians were treated as Australians, as part of the Australian family. Now we're creating new elites. And in fact, we've moved away from much of our old commitment to justice.
That's right. The basic social psychology here is that we are a tribal species. We're really, really good at doing us versus them. And it takes special conditions to turn that off. And I think the general trend in the late 20th century was very good at turning that off. Now, they had the benefit, our parents or grandparents, they had the benefit of having fought this tremendous war against the ultimate evil, and nothing brings people together like war. So the late 20th century was excellent on this, and I think we're losing touch with that. But the basic social psychology for our tribal species means we need to pay attention every chance we get to highlight commonalities, to say we are the same, we are one, we have these differences, but they are subsumed under larger things we have in common. The more we do that, the more we can address the concerns that many on the left have about exclusion and racism, et cetera. Whereas the more we go down this line of good and evil, one group is good, one group is evil, and this is what many of the intellectual movements in the academy are now about, is students are taught to see everything in terms of binaries. And when you do that, you're playing up our tendency to do binary or black and white or all or nothing thinking, and it doesn't lead to any place good.
We were talking the other day with Jordan Peterson in one of these very conversations and recounting that it was Solzhenitsyn in the darkness of a Gulag archipelago prison who wrote that the dividing line between good and evil ultimately lies somewhere across every human heart. And one of the great things, it seems to me, that is required in this standoff we've got at the moment between our tribes, quite apart from us understanding our shared humanity again, would be a good dose of humility, perhaps on all of our parts. That's right.
It's easy to preach. Absolutely, we are prone to self-righteousness. One of the themes of my first book, the Happiness Hypothesis, and of the Righteous Mind, was that evolution designed us for hypocrisy. Evolution designed us to always look good and virtuous to others while being able to lie even to ourselves. So it's very hard to preach and teach moral humility, but I think we can set up conditions that pull for it more or less. And the more that people on the other side are strangers who are blamed for the country's problems, the harder it's going to be morally humble. And so I don't know if this is happening to you in Australia. I imagine it is. Here, people used to be mixed up. We had racial segregation, but by class and by politics, people lived somewhat near each other. And what's been happening increasingly with rising prosperity and rising choice is self-segregation by class, certainly, which is very destructive, but also by politics. My former student, Matt Motel, has analyzed large-scale data sets. When somebody moves from point A to point B, on average, if they're on the left, on average, they're moving to a place with more coffee shops and fewer gun stores. Whereas if they're on the right, it's the opposite. So as the other side becomes further away and increasingly demonized, then yes, this moral humility becomes harder and harder. One suggestion I have, so at Heterodox Academy, an organization that I co-founded with some other professors, we developed a program called the Open Mind program. If people go to openmindplatform.org, they can find a program that basically draws on this social psychology that we've been talking about. Helps people understand, why is it so hard for us to understand each other? What goes wrong? Why are we all subject to confirmation bias, tribalism, blindness? So there are some educational projects that may work. We have some evidence so far that it does help people to understand the other side. So I'm hopeful that as the psychological and educational communities turn their attention to this, which is, I think, one of the great challenges of the 21st century, we may make some progress.
One of the things that I noticed, I had 19 years in the federal parliament in Australia, and I've been out around 10 years. I'm sure the two weren't related, but the great financial crisis sort of occurred about the time I left. And I think it opened up a lot of fissures in the West. We refused to own what we'd done to ourselves and to our children. And so everyone retreated to high ground. I'm not going to pay the price for fixing up this mess. And in a sense, we all do then because we don't tackle it logically. But it does strike me that it's much harder now to have a robust debate. So I think a robust debate, a robust civil square, where there can be plenty of shouting and yelling and screaming in a sense of you like, if it's non-personal. We ought to be passionate about ideas. We ought to be prepared to have a real go on the things that we think matter and how we're going to prioritise them. The problem is when it becomes personal, and so the level of relating is you're wrong because I hate you, almost.
Yes, when you look back at the correspondence, somebody just sent me today, somebody sent me a line from Thomas Paine, the essayist at the time of the American Revolution, wrote Common Sense, a letter that he wrote to George Washington with incredibly nasty accusations. But that was actually private. It was a private correspondence. I think politics has always been personal. It's always had a nasty edge to it. I think what's different is that the nature of communication, if it's one person to one person, it's between them. Or maybe it's in the Parliament or the Congress, it's a few people to a few people. But if the communication is really not, I'm not really talking to you. I don't actually care about you. I'm talking at you because 20,000 people are watching and they're going to judge me based on what I say and how I treat you. So I would never treat you with compassion because I'll be crucified for it. So I think that there's certain systemic settings that have changed. And of course, we barely mentioned it, but obviously social media really coming in since about 2009. I mean, Facebook opens up to the world in 2006, I think it is. Most people don't really have it until 2009, 2010. So this hyper-connected, the nature of communication and political communication especially, has really been transformed just in the last 8 years. And this is why one of the many reasons why things seem so dark and confusing. It's as though we're in an ecosystem, a really complex ecosystem that's been evolving over millions of years. And suddenly, God reaches down and he turns up the amount of oxygen from 20% to 80%. Let's just see what happens. And things are going haywire and all kinds of species are growing and dying. So we've had some major parameter changes to the nature of our social and political interactions just in the last 8 years. And we're still adapting to it. And again, that's one of the reasons I'm hopeful, is that however bad that is, whatever bad effects it has had, it's so recent that we don't know how we're going to adapt to it. And we probably will find some ways to adapt to it.
Well, let's come to that because you interact with young people. So I think it was Edmund Burke who said, life's a contract between the dead, the living, and the unborn. We've been the beneficiaries, people of yours and my generation. We stand on the shoulders of giants, really, who have given us so much to be thankful for in terms of our material well-being and our security, our freedoms. What are we passing on? Are we equipping, given that it's not going as well as we'd like, the next generation, A, to cope, B, to turn it around? So what's happening in our universities and for our young people?
So your quote from Burke, that is the essential conservative insight that really got me when I was learning about conservatism. Burke's insight that if a man, I forget how he puts it, but if you trade on the private stock of his own knowledge, just what little he knows is nothing compared to all that's been learned in the past. And that struck me as deeply wise and deeply true. And because people are prone to manias and following cult leaders, we're prone to running off. The Simpsons as a TV show, The Simpsons is great at catching this aspect of people. We can be incredibly stupid when you put us together in a mob. And so having some constraints based on tradition, religion, the past, generally leads to good results. Revolutions that are truly revolutionary, throwing off the past, I think they have a perfect record of being complete disasters. I'm not sure, but I would certainly, I'm with Thomas Sowell, I'm contrasting the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and saying a more balanced philosophy versus a more radical throw out the past, rename the months, redo the calendar, change the family. That's a really, really bad idea. So your quote from Burke about how it's a contract between these generations, yeah, my guess is not as much now. It's not seen as much by young people as that. There is a tendency now to judge people by what's presentism, just as ethnocentrism means we judge everybody by our culture standards, and if they don't meet our culture standards, they're terrible, we hate them. And now we have presentism. We're judging everybody in our culture by today's standards. And so if you made a joke in the 80s that is not appropriate for today, you could be in big trouble. And to go even further back, the people who wrote the U.S. Constitution, many of them had slaves, therefore we can't. I mean, obviously there are gradations, but I do think that we are in danger of losing that conservative insight that there is something to be gained by drawing on the past and having it evolve slowly. And this actually can bring us to something we haven't really talked about, which is globalization. We mentioned it briefly. There are those who think that our problems stem mostly from economic factors. To the extent that globalization matters, and it does matter in a lot of ways, I'd say one of the reasons it matters is because it led to so much change so quickly. And that has been deeply, deeply upsetting. Many of these changes, rationalization of production systems, allowing the work to go to where there's lower cost labor, all sorts of things that make sense to economists. If they simply had come in at half or a quarter the speed that they did, I think things would have gone much better. Now, of course, we would have given up on some economic growth, so I can't say that I wish that they had gone more slowly, but the social effects would have been quite digestible had they come in slowly. But because so many people were rendered obsolete, so much dislocation of jobs and factories and the usefulness of education. So I think globalization, with its very rapid changes, has certainly contributed to the sense of anomie. We don't know which way is up. Everything's falling apart. So again, the conservative concern for the speed of change, I think, is helpful.
Right. Well, interesting too, I think, just to reflect though, that I think sometimes one of the things that's overlooked is that we learn personally from our own history. You burn your hand on the toaster when you're a kid. You don't do it again. We're unwise, I think, to forget the lessons of history. One of them actually lies, I think, in this ruthless pursuit of equality. Equality of opportunity, a great thing. Enforced equality of outcomes. Mm-hmm. History shows us it's a disaster.
Yeah, that's right.
That you're better off going for freedom and justice and fairness, and then you get a high degree of equality. But if you go for equality, you'll tend to lose the other things. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't sound attractive, but history shows us that's what happens, in the same way that history's taught us that if we put our hand on the toaster, it hurts. Mm-hmm.
That's right. I spent 3 months in Asia in 2015. I spent a few weeks in Shanghai, and I was just stunned to learn that there was a period where everybody was paid the same salary. It didn't matter what you did. Everybody, this was the salary for work. And one thing I can say from studying morality within social psychology is that the deep psychology of fairness has two components. One is proportionality. It's given to us by what we call equity theory, which is we really keep track of the ratio of everybody's inputs to outputs. And when somebody's getting more than they put in, we resent them, we gossip about them, we want them to fail. So there's proportionality is very, very powerful. And then the other is called procedural fairness or procedural justice. We want people to be treated properly. They should be treated with respect. They should be treated by a system that is not partial, not biased against them. And so to the extent that social justice often is improving procedures so that they are just, that's great. Mm-hmm. That is fairness. That is progress. To the extent that some elements of social justice now, at least in America, and I assume it's in Australia too, focus on numerical equality of outcomes, even when there are gigantic differences in the pipeline. Now, there's so many differences in the pipeline by class, by race, by gender. Some of those might have to do with discrimination further back. Some of those, in terms of gender, sometimes those are because of different choices. Men and women enjoy different things, they make different choices. But we have to pay attention to what's the cause of it. We can't just say, look, a group is underrepresented, therefore there is a systemic problem that must be fixed. And this is one of the problems I think that the left has is that when they pursue that, when they pursue equality of outcomes, when there's not equality of inputs, many people find that to be unfair. And I think working class morality, in particular, in this country at least, working class people often have a real sense of proportionality and sometimes they'll resent the heavy-handed methods to attain equality of outcomes. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think it's very valuable, thank you. Let's come now though to, we spent a lot of time talking, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but can't keep you forever. The issue of preparing young people for their own sakes, their own lives, but also because they have to take our society forward, and they in turn one day will have to wonder what they're passing on to their children. I know you've got what sounds like it's going to be a very interesting book coming up on that, but before you do, you've already said a lot about this, along with a lot of others. Frank Ferretti's written a book called What's Happening in Our Universities. Are we in fact failing young people by trying to wrap them in cotton wool and creating a situation where they don't develop the resilience they need? You know, you have warnings, microaggression warnings, trigger warnings, safe places, platform denying, which is the very antithesis of allowing freedom of speech, surely, which is our first line of defence when we want to defend all our other freedoms. Are we doing the right thing by our young people?
Well, I just got this in the mail today. This is the proofs of my next book, The Coddling of the American Mind. The title was made up originally by an editor at The Atlantic. It's a very catchy title. The subtitle is really much more what the book is about, which is how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure.
Wow.
I'm under strict instructions from the publishers to not talk about this until it comes out on September 4th. So I'm not going to answer your question, except to say that in general, I think Frank Ferretti has some very good insights on what's going on, and that in general, when we often feel that we want to do things to help people, but people need to learn from experience, and we often prevent children from learning from experience. And when we do that, we harm them. So that's a general principle that I will be talking a lot about after September 4th.
Well, John, we look forward to the release of that book. Try and make certain, if I can do anything to help, I'll certainly try and make certain that it's widely read in Australia. And we look forward to a planned visit.
Yes, I hope to come in July of 2019.
Well, we look forward to it very much. And what you have to say here is so relevant for us as well. We're part of that English-speaking world that's grappling with all of these things. To me, it is astonishing to learn that of the 43 universities in my own country, only one imposes no restrictions on speech other than the law of the land. And something needs to be done about it.
We'll see what we can do in 2019.
Thank you.
John, it's a pleasure.